want to ask you a question and answer it, okay? What is Scripture? Well, 2 Timothy 3:16 describes it. All Scripture is God-breathed and is useful for teaching, rebuking, correcting, and training in righteousness. The word Scripture there is the Greek word graphe. We get our word graphic from that, and those kind of words. And it means writing, okay? So the writing from God is God-breathed. It's writing that brings word from God. That's Scripture. Writing that brings word from God. And it's all about the text of the Scripture. The original Scripture, the Old Testament was Hebrew, New Testament was written in Greek. I have a background in Greek. Now, I'm not a Greek scholar, but I use Greek tools to get into the Greek text. And I've been doing that since 1973, August of 1973. And I want to describe to you quickly how I was taught the New Testament in Bible college. We had an entire year of Introduction to New Testament, a 4-hour class every week for a year of college study. And these were the rules. The only book was an interlinear New Testament. You have a translation on the left. This is what it looks like. And this is actually the one I used, okay? Almost 51 years ago in August of 1973, has Revised Standard Version on the left. And then it has literal Greek with a literal Greek translation under it, okay? And so you study the text of the Scripture. Now, we could not use any commentaries, anything like that. We had to go to the Scripture and get the Scripture to speak to us. And then we wrote a notebook. We did what is called inductive Bible study. We developed notebooks on the entire New Testament through that inductive Bible study. When I came out of that class after a year of doing that, here's what I understood. The Scripture is not what any dude says about it. It's what God said through the writing of the originals. That's the Scripture. Now, we have translations. Some of them do pretty good. I typically use New International Version today. I did a video about that yesterday, why I don't use the King James, because it's the least accurate. And I walked away from that with the understanding that what any guy says about the Scripture is irrelevant. The Scripture is the standard. It's the standard. And it's the standard that we need to adopt. It's the standard that we need to study. It's the standard that we need to teach. We teach the Scripture, not a theological position from some dude. We teach the Scripture. That's what I've always done. I still do that, okay? And we need to understand the Scripture. And you know what? I use commentaries today, but when you use a commentary, you see what it says, and you go back and compare it to the Scripture. And you go with the Scripture. The Scripture is what counts. That is ingrained in me, and that is the basis of my teaching. Now, I don't have a background in Hebrew, but I look at different translations and read people that I know are consistent with the Scripture. It is always about the Scripture. Not everybody understands that. They look for ways to sustain their theological position. I don't do that. I want to see the truth from the Scripture, always. And it's always consistent. And then I'll harmonize if I see something that's a little different than what I expected before. The Scripture is the standard, okay? That's the standard. Hang on to that and study the Scripture.